And when I was in Jordan, not this last trip last year, but 2 years ago in 2008, you had a lot of the refugees coming in, and it was just, that problem was just heating up. With Jordan now has some 500,000 Iraqi refugees. One of the things that struck me was the cell phone. So you didn't have, you know, massive camps of people sort of flooding from Iraq, not knowing where they're going. Most of them, if they could get in the country, had some place to go. Not someplace great to stay long term, but they had a relative or a friend or someplace. So that wasn't immediately as visible, but it put this big strain on the system. But I was talking to a lot of them that I could find, and one guy showed me a cell phone, and he had a little picture of a sign that basically said, you know, Shia scumbags, come back here and we're going to, you know, in Arabic of course, come back here and we'll kill your family.
Wow.
And his brother, they left the one brother behind, and the brother had sent him this picture of their front door.
Wow.
And that kind of, you know, we don't think of refugee flows as having that kind of immediate information exchange. We think of the refugees as we do in Darfur, you know, the sort of the poor, destitute people flowing across the land, going to who knows where.
Right.
And these are, you know, equally devastating. But I wonder if have you found any ways in which this kind of media information exchange has changed politics in a way?
You know, I think it's I mean, if somebody asked me what's the most dramatic impact on Iraqi life, other than the war, obviously, I mean, it would be cell phones. I mean, that's the one tangible change in some, I'm overstating it there, but I mean, its repercussions, reverberations across Iraq is just vast. And I see it, like, you know, I tell you, I mean, this is, I'm not sure how profound this is or insightful, but there's almost this kind of, I think, culture that's grown up around, how do I put this? I was spending a lot of time in a small town called Dhul-U'ayya, and for the past 7 years I've kept on going back there, and it's always struck me as such a compelling place because it was in the very early part of the occupation. The Americans invaded it, like 2,500 troops went in, and then they left. But they set into motion a sequence of events that transformed this town. This very small example of intervention, I mean, it's a footnote to the war. Nobody even remembers the name of it. But it set into this motion, anyways, and it's a long story, and the reverberations continue until today. But it always struck me this, again, talking about like media and communications, is there's almost a cult around, you know, everyone would remember the violence through cell phone pictures. And that was the kind of, that was the way people related to it. And it was, I mean, these were gory pictures of beheadings. And I always, when I sat there and talked to people and interviewed them, I wasn't sure, was this to remind themselves of the horrors of what happened? Was it the way to keep them, you know, in some ways to keep the fight alive, as a warning? But there was a cult of these, there was this kind of fetish about these pictures that I found very...
That they share with each other?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or forward,
share, and they bring it to you, and somebody else will bring their cell phone in, and videos the same way. I mean, I think it did propel the war in some respects. I think it did. It mobilized people in some way, in disastrous ways. But it's a profound part of the conflict there.
Just kind of remembering.
Absolutely.
Or not wanting to be forgotten, if not remembering for themselves, but evidence to whomever that this really was as bad as it was.
Right. You know, I think of another kind of, this is a different take on it, but you know. Maybe when people are too smart with information and media, there was this campaign in Lebanon where they were trying to fight against the sectarianism, fight against, you know, sectarian identities, and they put up posters saying, you know, this apartment for Maronites only, parking lot for Sunnis only. And then they'd have a, you know, a poster with names on a doorbell, and they'd all be, you know, a specific sect. And you know, this was how ridiculous it was with the idea of the campaign, but it touched too close to home, and everyone thought it was real. And I just thought it was a spectacular insight into how charged, you know, those identities are right now, and combustible. I keep using that word, but I think it's combustible in some ways. Do you know in Yemen? Because it's interesting that you mentioned Yemen. I mean, that does the one question I have for you on that was: does the state manipulate this stuff at all? I mean, it's like you said, it is a, you know. It's a diverse country in a lot of respects, and it hasn't been at the center of these sectarian conflicts in Iraq and Lebanon. But do you feel the state ever uses that as a way to, like, you know, solidify its standing or to buttress its support?
Yeah. I think it does on a local level. Like, I think in various conflicts they'll talk to certain groups in a certain way, but the state isn't on message for the most part.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, there's just not a coherent message. And in Jordan, you know, there's literally messages. There's, you know, Saatchi and Saatchi $1 million campaigns of who we are and let's all get along. And of course there's policies that, you know, reproduce tensions between Palestinians in Jordan and others, despite the government having these, you know, very slick campaigns.
One question I had, Jillian, you mentioned Saatchi and Saatchi about Jordan, about these media campaigns they do. Do you find them successful? Do they resonate at all, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, not the most recent one, but there was one in, I think, 2005 that was Al-Urdun Awalan.
Yeah, I remember that.
And there was a campaign in Egypt way back in the, I think, the 70s under Sadat. I'm not positive. But I had Jordanian friends pointing out, and they're like, yeah, it really worked well for Egypt. So, it's not even a new campaign, $50 million, and they can't even come up with something new.
Amazing.
But the posters were pretty interesting. They had, holding the Jordanian flag, and you see, like, the Palestinian embroidered, the woman's hand, and you see a business hand, a suit, and then, a bare sleeve, and, everybody's there holding up the flag together.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so, I talked to Jordanians about it, and some of them say, yeah, this is good. We're not just about Palestine, even though half of our population is, of Palestinian origin. We're not, we're too involved in these other issues in the region. We need to take care of things at home.
Yeah.
And so some people would say that this was a good thing. Most people just kind of rolled their eyes, or they referenced that you could get chocolates, or my favorite, those little jelly bracelets, the plastic bracelets that say, Al-Urdun Awalan.
Yeah.
Inside says made in China in big letters. And so like, we can't even make them here. What chance do we have? We can't even make our own propaganda material in the country.
That's what and the government paid for Saatchi and Saatchi to do this.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, somebody needs to do a piece on Saatchi and Saatchi, because they're so involved in Lebanon.
I have a PhD student, actually two, that are doing a co-authored piece on PR campaigns.
Really?
Authoritarian PR campaigns. And they're looking at Tunisia and Syria and some other countries. But
Interesting.
why Syria has failed to mount a Syria campaign. It's just, fallen flat. And they had a couple local efforts that were kind of laughable. And, Tunisia, MEPI's located in Tunisia. It's the great centerpiece for promoting democracy when it's, just one of the worst in terms of human rights violations. Completely, it's a police state for all practical purposes. It's very repressive. People often won't talk. And yet there's other interesting things happening in Tunisia as well. And so, you have a lot of these. I think there's a really interesting way to look at how regimes are portraying themselves and selling themselves. And this loops back to something we mentioned earlier, selling the fact that there's an existence of, ethnic or sectarian conflict that needs to be addressed, and therefore we need help and assistance and military aid, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, they're selling the, we're one great nation, and these sort of, projects of nation building.
I mean, in Lebanon, I think those campaigns almost, they brought the country to the brink of civil war back in '07 and '08.
The campaigns themselves.
I mean, Saatchi and Saatchi, like, and it's very coded language, but very, everybody knew what they were saying. I mean, it's like, we love life, and it's, it's a critique of Hezbollah somehow. And Hezbollah, of course, says, comes back with their own campaign. I mean, you saw for a while, the airport road was just competing posters of, we love life, we love, we have dignity. I mean, each side going at it with each other, and it was remarkable, but it definitely, but just like you're saying, in terms of those identities, I think it was successful in some ways, but it was successful in hardening the lines, that were around which that conflict was being built, and it was a sectarian conflict in the end. It was interesting, and this is one thing I'm hoping WikiLeaks is going to help out on. I mean, I was always wondering where that money was coming from, especially in those campaigns in Lebanon. I mean, we knew with Hezbollah, but this kind of what they called March 14th, where was that money coming from? And I was always a little suspicious about that.